Hello and welcome to this webinar on using GL Education's value-added service for IB diploma schools. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the service and how we're planning to develop it this year, and hopefully encourage you to get involved in the pilot phase which we are currently running. GL Education has partnered with the Fisher Families Trust, FFT, to provide this value-added service for International Baccalaureate Diploma Programme schools. And just a little bit about the Fisher Family Trust is they are have a very strong reputation in England for providing value-added services to English schools, and so they have the expertise to help us to develop the service for IB schools. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about value-added measures to begin with and why they are of benefit. So one of the common ways we evaluate schools is we often just look at the grades students achieve in their final examination. So we measure schools by their attainment, or in the case of IB schools, their attainment in IB diploma. But the term value-added is more commonly used to describe the value that schools add, or the difference you make to students based on where they start and where they end up. So based on their baseline, in this case it would be Cat 4. And having a value-added measures enables you to compare yourselves to other schools with students of a similar starting point, as well as them being a fairer and more accurate measure of student performance and school effectiveness when used together with other measures. So value add's really about the difference you make to your students in their learning over the time they're with you. So what about the value-added service for IB diploma schools using Cat 4? So what we'll need, and in order to develop this service, is we need the GL Cat 4 test results and the IB diploma program results for students who did the IB diploma last year, or for students who will be doing the IB diploma this summer, so 2019, or in the academic year 2018 to 2019. If you become part of the pilot phase this year, you will get the value-added measures for your school, which can help you measure evidence the success over time, identify areas for improvement, inform target setting, self-evaluation, and any evidence for accreditation, depending on where you are in the world. The other thing we will get out of this pilot is the indicative pointers, so the most likely grades that students will get in their diploma program using their Cat 4 as the baseline. So that's another advantage of being part of the pilot, is to help develop the indicators. So how do we measure value added? So first of all, we take a baseline, and as I said before, in this case it would be GL Education's Cat 4, and this baseline is independent of the school or the teacher, and it gives you a baseline set of student scores. From that baseline, we look at the students' most likely performance compared to similar students. So that's the sort of dotted line, most likely result based on their Cat 4 score. We take a number of issues into account when we do this, not just their Cat 4 overall mean, but the battery scores and other factors such as the subject choice and the gender as well of the student. So those are all taken into account when we develop the value-added measure. We then look at whether their actual performance exceeds, so that would be the green dot, is higher than their most likely performance, in which case the value added has a positive value, or if their actual result is lower than the most likely performance, in which case they would have a negative value added score. So when you compare their expected performance with the actual score, you get the value added result. And the model indicates how likely the student is expected to perform and their actual attainment. And sometimes we call this value the residual. So let's take an example of how a school might add value to a child. And this child's name is Poppy, and she has a CAT mean score of 102, which means her most likely performance, her composite performance on the IB diploma based on her Cat 4 score was 38. In the end, her actual points for the IB diploma were 40 in the green dot. So the value added was 2 points. And the value added measure is calculated by subtracting the indicated, or most likely in this case 38, from the actual, which is 40. For the school or a class, value added is calculated by adding up all the value added scores of individual pupils across the group. The value added measures are presented in easy to navigate dashboards. They are also very visually easy to understand, and that's a huge advantage, is the presentation of the data in these dashboards, some examples of which I will show you in a few moments. So there's a school summary dashboard which provides the overall attainment and the value added for the school, and we'll go through that in a minute. There are also dashboards showing different school groups. You can look at your school's performance by gender, by Cat4 ability group, and by Cat4 verbal group. The verbal group is particularly useful if you're in an international school and you have a number of EAL students coming in with quite low verbal scores to begin with. You can really see which students you're adding value to in terms of their verbal ability developing and their scores increasing in the long term. There's also a student dashboard which allows you a full breakdown at student level. You can view your students based on their CAT estimates as well as their actual grades, and I'll show you some of that as well. And there's also a breakdown by subject for each student as a dashboard, and there's a subject overview dashboard as well. So let's have a look at some of the examples of the dashboards that would become available to pilot schools, as well as to the service generally when it goes live after the pilot phase. So you can see here you'd have your Cat4 data, you'd have a summary of your Cat4 data on the right hand side, you'd have a summary of your students on the left hand side, you've got attainment on the left hand side, so the percentage attaining 24 points or above in your school, the average grade, the average point score for English and for mathematics, or for group 1 and group 5. As the case may be, as well as the value added average grade, the average value added for group 1 English in this case, and group 5 mathematics. So this gives you the summary of how your school has performed in terms of both attainment and value add in the IB diploma. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, in which you can see there's the average age standardized score for a school, as well as the average per battery. And you can see the school, all of those scores are above average. And then in the attainment box, which is on the right, you can see that the average point score for the IB diploma for the school was 27. The average grade was a 5. The average grade in English was a 6. And the average grade in mathematics was a 5. So that's the kind of information you would get on the school summary dashboard. When the service is live, or when you look at your pilot results, you'll be able to compare the results to what you might have expected. You can have conversations with teachers, with senior leaders about whether or not these are the sorts of attainment and value-added scores you would expect in your school. Let's have a look at another aspect of the dashboard, which is the value add, where you can see that the average value add for the school was plus 1.11, and there was a positive value add in group 1 English and in group 5 mathematics, although group 1 English was almost a grade and a half in terms of the value add, whereas maths was slightly more than half a grade. That would be expected in a school where children come in quite low in terms of their English skills, their verbal skills, and then they acquire those skills in their time in the school, and they actually do a lot better than originally anticipated. And you can really see the value you add in that way. That variation between language and literature, in this case English, and mathematics, is very clear to see. One of the things about this dashboard is this dashboard shows 1 year's worth of data. If you would be using this service longitudinally, so you can start to see trends over time, you would get a date above that column, and you would have further columns of information being displayed. Let's have a quick look at the sorts of things you would see on a student dashboard. So here you would have a look and you would have the CAT average mean score for all students, or for males or for females, or by CAT ability grouping. You can see we've got the CAT scores grouped by ability and the number of students in each ability group and their average CAT score. You then have an average IB score. The percentage in that group, which would got the 24 points or above, and then the Group 1 English average grade and the Group 5 Mathematics average grade, as well as the value add for those, the average, the English and the maths. So that's the kind of information you would get to see in the student group dashboard. Obviously, the groups we have there at the moment are the ones which we've decided to put into the service. As this is a service, it would evolve over time based on feedback. So if there were further groupings that we wanted to look at or schools wish to look at, those could be developed in the long term. One of the ways to look at this information to make a greater impact on your school improvement is to compare attainment and value added. So to have a look at whether or not you're making a particular impact with girls or with boys, with those who come in fairly low, with those who come in average, with those who come in very high, and whether or not the impact you make is different from the attainment, and why might this be, and what different stories you can tell about your school to various stakeholders based on that information. So here, looking at the value added, one of the questions you could ask is your school making a greater impact with certain verbal ability groups? So are you making a good impact with those who come in lower than average or average in their verbal skills? Are you making more of an impact with those who come in higher? In this example, the low and the lower than average, the value added is incredibly high, although the grade point score might not be quite as high. So the relationship between attainment and value added says something about how different groups are performing differently, but also the impact the school's having on those groups' performance. So the student dashboard gives a full breakdown at student level of the results and the value added. So it has each student as their CAT, their average point scores, their average grades, their average grade for English, the average grade for mathematics, the value added, and it's done per student, and you can filter by gender, by ability group, or by verbal ability group. You can sort them by the highest or the lowest grades, or the highest or the lowest value add, and you can compare different cohorts in this way year on year. You can look to see whether there's been negative value add and why might that be, or positive value add and what you think you're doing particularly well. You can rank the students in order of attainment. You can rank them in order of value added. So you can look at this dashboard in any which way you want to, and you'd be able to export this information in various formats as well. Now, I talked about things being represented graphically. So one of the things that is represented graphically here is the average grade. So the value add and the CAT mean score and the average grade are plotted against each other. And you can see on the whole here, most of the scores are above the line, so better than what was expected. So the school on a whole would be looking at a positive value add. And the average grade at the bottom is plotted against the most likely grade. And again, you can see that the value add is positive. You can, if you want to, as a team within the school, you can reflect on which student score had the highest value add score. You might remember that student and how they came into the school and the sorts of results they got on CAT 4, and then how they performed in their IB diploma program, and which student has perhaps had the lowest value add. Was there something going on? Did something happen in that student's time at the school? As well as those who kind of on the line, who scored average, sort of slightly better than average. One of the things the scatter plots allow you to do is you can hover over those dots and it'll give you not only the student's name, but also what their CAT score was, what their average grade score was predicted as well as what their value add wound up being. So you could really do a sort of a retrospective or reflection on your IB diploma results. The other thing that will come out of this pilot study, which will allow you to access the value-added dashboards, which shows that the success you've had at student department or even at school level, is it helps you to identify areas of improvements and enhance target setting. And one of the ways it could enhance your target setting is what we'll be able to do is to improve and to develop a full set of IB pointers. So when I talk about them, the most likely grade, that's what we'll be able to get based on the CAT scores. We will be able to give a full set of indicated IB diploma grades, as you can see here, or IB diploma pointers, which are really helpful in motivating and setting realistic targets for learners taking the IB diploma. It enables appropriate planning, appropriate subject choice by indicating sort of likely future performance, and it can help inform discussions as well with both students and parents about the type of grades a student could be aiming for. So how does the value-added analysis support you? Is it helps you with that self-evaluation by identifying areas that you might want to investigate further, that you wish to discuss. It really is a robust evidence base to support your school improvement plans, to really interrogate where you think you're doing a good job, where you think things could be better. And it allows school leaders to evaluate their school's performance against other schools' performance, not only using attainment, but also using that impact measure of value added. So subject leaders and teachers can also evaluate at subject and class level performance, not only again in terms of attainment, but also in terms of the value being added. And it allows you to analyze the performance of different groups within your schools. So I would really hope that if this is of interest as an IB diploma school, which I'm fairly sure it will be, that you can sign up for the pilot now and be part of it as we run the development of the service through the course of this year. I'm going to hand back over to Andy to see if there are any questions about what I've shared with you today.